The Life of David Livingston, Part 17. On March 3rd, the party reached Tete, a place on the Zambezi in possession of the Portuguese. The commandant, Major Sicard, received Dr. Livingston with most generous welcome. He also presented his men with abundance of provisions and one of his own houses in which to live, free from the bite of his tapons till they could construct their own huts. The bite of this insect sometimes causes fatal fever. It may please our homeopathic friends, says Dr. Livingston, to hear that in curing the bite of the tapon, the natives administer one of the insects bruised in the medicine employed. Interesting. Formerly a place of very considerable importance, Tete had now become comparatively a ruin, with but 2,000 or 3,000 inhabitants and insignificant trade. The cause of the decadence of Portuguese power here is very clearly stated by Dr. Livingston. At first, considerable quantities of wheat, millet, maize, coffee, sugar, indigo, besides gold and ivory, were exported. The agricultural resources of the country round about were very great. Gold dust was produced at various washings north, south, and west of Tete. The interior swarmed with elephants, and ivory could be bought for a song. Slaves were used in agriculture, gold washing, and elephant hunting. A market for these was opened, and they were sold for transportation. Thus, the goose which laid the golden eggs was slain. Tete declined, and is now of less importance than a great majority of the country towns of the United States. There is a wall about the old town, within which are a few European houses. Most of the people live outside the walls and engage in agricultural pursuits. At the time of Livingston's visit, there were less than a score of Portuguese in the place, and with the exception of a few soldiers temporarily stationed there on account of sickness at a post lower down the Zambezi. All the country roundabout available for agricultural purposes is under cultivation. The value of goods now required for the trade of Tete is only about 45,000 annually. Plantations of coffee, formerly profitable and exporting considerable quantities, are now entirely closed, and hardly a single tree can be found. The indigo is found growing everywhere, and large quantities of the senna plant grow in and about Tete, but neither is collected. So they've got the plants for indigo, but they're just not collected. Nobody's harvesting it. There are no less than 3 gold washings near Tete, formerly quite productive, but now little worked. Dr. Livingston himself was the discoverer of coal deposits not far distant. On the 22nd of April, Dr. Livingston left Tete, and a fine boat having been presented to him by Major Sicard, the commandant, he proceeded by the Zambezi to Senna, where he arrived on the 27th. The voyage down the broad, deep, rapid river, crowded with cultivated islands, and most of the way bounded by shores of picturesque beauty, was like a pleasure trip. The great traveler thought the state of Tete quite lamentable, but found that of Senna 10 times worse. Oh dear. Everything was in a state of stagnation and ruin. There was but a single exception, and this is not among the Portuguese or half-castes. Some Africans were building boats after the European model. They were very well made and sell at prices ranging from 100 to 500. On the 11th of May, the whole population of Senna turned out to witness Dr. Livingston's departure. His party was now small, a number having been left at Tete, and others here hired to transport government goods in canoes to the former place. The commandant had liberally supplied provisions, and the sail down the Zambezi to Mazzaro, the beginning of the great river's delta, was very pleasant. At Mazzaro, the party took the way by the Quilimane River, being that portion of the Zambezi known by this name, and arrived at the town of Quilimane on the 20th of May. This is a most disconsolate place in a marshy, unhealthy situation, several miles distant from the ocean. Here the missionary remained until July 12, when, accompanied by his faithful Makololo companion, Sekwebu, he embarked on Her Majesty's brig Frolic for Mortirius. The voyage was made in precisely 1 month. Sekwebu was a general favorite on shipboard and rapidly picked up a knowledge of English. At Mortirius, a steamer came out to tow the vessel into the harbor. Sekwebu, the strain on whose mind by new and constantly changing scenes had been severe and had given evidences of aberration, now became insane. And on the following day cast himself into the sea, and pulling himself down by the chain cable, was drowned. Poor fellow. This was the last that was ever seen of this fine Makololo gentleman. A long and careful search for his body was unsuccessful. And here it'll be proper to take a retrospective view of the missionary labors, explorations, scientific researches of Dr. Livingston thus far made in the continent which had so far long sat in darkness. It'll be recollected that he arrived at Cape Town in the extreme southern part of Africa in 1840, when therefore he sailed from Quilimane in July 1856, and he had been 16 years engaged in laboring in that part of the world about which the least had been known, for he had advanced for the advancement of the cause of Christian civilization and the progress of knowledge and science. If the preceding pages and extracts have not been prepared in vain, those who have read them have correctly concluded that Dr. Livingston is no ordinary missionary of the gospel. It is very much to be that. It is very much to be that. He is that and more. We find in him, for instance, many of the elements of a successful statesman. If he cannot get all that he thinks desirable, he will take all the good that he can accomplish, trusting to time, reflection, and God's good providence to bring about the remainder. This admirable characteristic was most happily illustrated, so far as the individuals are concerned, in the notable case of Sechele, chief of the Bakuanas. Had it been undertaken to bring him into the church with a rush, there might indeed have been a temporary success, but he probably would have gone out with a rush before long, and accomplished great and long continued harm instead of good. Long established institutions or habits and customs, if you please, of tribes of men whose existence has continued for many centuries are not to be hastily overthrown, even though they may have been established in error, if you please again, human depravity. A child with a hammer in its hand or a lunatic can undermine St. Peter's and bring down the majestic pile into ruins. Genius, patience, long years of labor would be required even to rebuild it. The faculty of tearing down is oftentimes admirable, but when one can destroy evil by replacing it with good, he has the true inspiration of heaven and the magnificent genius of progress. If Dr. Livingston did not leave Columbang with so many professing believers in the religion which he espoused as might have been encouraging to the sanguine, he at any rate succeeded in eradicating some of the most lamentable notions of barbarism from the minds of the Bacawaians, and implementing instead of them some of the most beneficent character teachings of the Christian system. Thus were several wars prevented among the tribes of South Africa by the power of the self-same truths which have guided to illustrious triumphs of peace and the international polity of Mr. Gladstone and John Bright, and this long before the joint High Commission between Great Britain and the United States had begun or even been dreamed of. If the Bacawaians were not taken at once from the gloom of barbarism and placed on a plane of civilization, they were placed fairly in the road leading thither, and year by year they have been going on into the right direction. They are no longer barbarians. A thousand degrading habits and customs and lamentable errors have been abandoned. They are growing into civilized beings, and their civilization will be Christian. A similar fact is true of Dr. Livingston's influence among the Makololo, Sebetene, who established a singular people in permanent power and rude prosperity through the large portion of Central Africa. Though a man of war, possessed indeed by nature with a military genius of most remarkable scope and versatility, was undoubtedly greatly the superior in moral attributes of his successor, Sekoletulu, and he certainly was among the foremost of the modern Africans of whom we have any knowledge in practical statesmanship. He was in reality a much greater man than many a hero of classical story or song, and may with no little appropriations be called the Robert Bruce of Central Africa. Had Sebetene lived a few years longer, it cannot be doubted that with Dr. Livingston's practical assistance, the condition of the Makololo would have been vastly improved. But though Sekoletulu is much inferior in ability and ambition to Sechele, not to mention Sebetene, yet is he, through Livingston's influence, a much wiser and albeit ruler than, according to all probability. He could otherwise have been, and his people are more ambitious, more prosperous, more happy. They too are on the way to a better and higher stage of existence. Their huts are better than they were. They are improving their breeds of cattle. Their system of agriculture has progressed. Many savage punishments and customs have been abolished. Their growth in moral and intellectual strength is evident. Sakaletu, though greatly inferior to Sebenentine, rules